have a conversation around some of these topics. So we have three amazing colleagues and recruiters that do really amazing work for UCCS and others. We have Kristen Highland from T. Rowe Price. We have Christine Felke from BKD CPA Advisors, and we have Lindsay Hojanowski from Progressive Insurance. So Kristen, Christine, and Lindsay, we'll just go in order. I'm going to have each of you introduce yourself, your company, tell us a little bit about your organization, and then specifically how your work has changed because of the pandemic. So we'll start with you, Kristen.
Sure, great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm Kristen Highland. I am a campus relationship manager at T. Rowe. I've been with the firm for about 10 years. And I sit within our very small campus recruiting team. A lot has changed, but maybe it would be better to go through introductions because I could definitely give a breadth of what's happening, what's new, and I think a lot of things in a really, really great way. We are an incredibly conservative organization, and for so long, everything had to be done in the office, and it's a little bit refreshing to see that we've been able to mobilize not only our internship program, but also a lot of our full-time roles virtually. So happy to speak to that, but I'll let Christine jump in with her introduction.
Great, well, thank you so much. My name is Christine Felke. As Danny mentioned, I'm with BKD CPAs and Advisors. I work for a firm that's been in business since 1923, and so they've seen a lot of changes over the years, I'm sure. I've been with them for since 2006 and been in the public accounting realm since, we'll say nearly 25 years. I'm super excited to be here today and hope that, just like Kristen, we can kind of talk through some interesting changes that we've all probably experienced in the last 3 to 4 months. So I'll go hand it over to Lindsay next.
Great, thank you, Christine. And yes, thank you, Danny, for inviting me to participate in this panel. I have actually been with Progressive, I'm probably the least tenured on this panel, but less than a year. I started in September, but you know, we are an insurance company of over 42,000 individuals, but I specifically recruit for IT for our college program. And so we like to say that we are an IT company that just happens to sell insurance, because, you know, a lot of times people don't realize behind the scenes, you know, who really does make up all those 42,000 employees. So, and just as Kristen and Christine shared, happy to get into what has changed. A lot has changed and a lot is still uncertain, as we all know. So happy to talk more about that.
Thank you. And we appreciate you all for taking time out of your days to help us and help our alumni. So thank you all. Kudos to you guys for the commitment. So question one that I'll throw out is, and for those alum and students on the line, we will go through about 3 or 4 questions, and then we'll open it up after that for anyone to throw questions in the chat. You can put those questions in the chat now if that helps you. If there's something on your mind, we'll make sure we get to it as best we can. So I'll throw out question one, which is, how has your recruiter application process changed because of the pandemic? And let's start with Christine, if she's ready.
Sure. So the recruitment itself hasn't necessarily changed. The formats, we still post in the same places. The amount of recruiting we are doing currently for this year has slowed down, but we do anticipate that will pick up again for, you know, later this fall and next year. As far as, you know, how like the style of recruiting has changed, it's, you know, we're doing everything virtually. We're all almost predominantly working from home still. And so we're trying to use different formats like video interviews, live video interviews, pre-recorded video interviews, and kind of like coffee chats, virtual coffee chats, things of that nature, just to get to know the candidates. A lot more phone screenings and phone chats as well. Obviously, the safety of our employees and of, you know, all of the candidates, we don't really want to bring you into the office to risk anybody's safety and health. So that's why we're moving to a virtual format, just like I think everybody pretty much has. Any of the interviews that have been in person, as far as the recruitment process has gone, it's very limited, and everybody's really following stringent safety procedures at this point. So, but a lot of coffee chats and things like that. So that's always fun.
Thanks for sharing, Christine. We'll go to you next, Lindsay, if you're ready.
Yeah, absolutely. So similarly, I think we had about 8,000 employees who are already set up to work from home, and within a matter of those last few weeks of March, we now have over 40,000 working from home. So I mean, everything has shifted virtual. As far as our college interviewing practice, we generally would conduct like an initial phone interview followed by an on-site interview at Progressive. And so the only thing that's really changed is now, we have access to software like WebEx, like Microsoft Teams, where we can conduct that initial phone screen now via video. So we've gotten a lot of feedback actually from our interns this summer who would like the first time they connect with someone to be over video. And so we think we're going to take that moving forward. And then for our final round interviews, if you will, which normally, we go over the top and we invite candidates on site. We did have to complete one of those in March of this past spring. So we have experience organizing a more formal final interview event where there's multiple interviews taking place over video. We actually used WebEx for that. And we also like to conduct a job shadow during that interview event. So we were able to do that virtually as well. And of course, just like the others on the call, I'm sure we're exploring other ways we can, bring our culture to these candidates and give them more exposure, and also figuring out, well, what does that look like? If we give them a virtual tour of campus, we don't know, is that authentic? We don't know when we're going to really be back on our Progressive campuses. So a lot of conversations happening. Ultimately, as far as the initial part, the application, we still post online, and maybe now more than ever, we have more time to dedicate to reviewing your online resume submission as opposed to just relying on maybe meeting you at a career fair. So to Christine's point too, though, just trying to get creative in terms of other time we can set aside to meet and connect with candidates. So yeah, I think that's it for this one.
Thanks, Lindsay. Let's throw it over to you, Kristen.
So not to be redundant, but very similar. I would say what's top of mind for us is what our engagement will look like on campus for the upcoming academic year. And so we're obviously flexible and remaining agile to what's obviously is best for the students as well as for our associates. So we are 7,000 employees globally with 16 offices around the world, and 97% of our workforce are remote. From a technology perspective, I think it was nearly 95% were in office prior to the pandemic. And after quite a bit of evaluation, we have heard that about 65% who've requested to telework will be remaining home. So it's really nice to see that there's dialogue and questions going on. From a recruitment and application perspective, not much has changed. So we are reviewing resumes, we're conducting interviews, and at this point, even though we are staggering back into the office on a rolling basis, you need to get business unit approval for final round interviews in person. So I think we're all pretty consistent from a process perspective for sure.
Thanks for sharing, and thanks for sharing some of the innovation you all are considering or thinking about or talking about because of what happened. So to kind of build off that question, how can a candidate really stand out on their application or resume, and how can they specifically showcase resiliency, particularly during the pandemic? Maybe they had to take care of children and work, or maybe they had to do some of those things to really showcase that they're handling a lot. So I'll open this one up to any of you three that feel comfortable kind of taking it on.
So I'll jump in from a resiliency perspective, and obviously being on the campus recruiting side of TRO, we were very aware that if we had canceled our previously scheduled summer internship program, it would have left a hole in 103 students globally, and that's just not something that we were willing to take on, because there wasn't, although it obviously hasn't translated fully as what it would be for an in-person internship, we have really been able to mobilize a virtual internship. So, going forward for the next 3 to 4 years as a campus recruiter, I'm keenly aware that there will be some gaps in student resumes from an internship perspective, whether at an undergraduate or a graduate degree. And obviously just where we are from a job market perspective as well. So I think there's definitely been a bit of sensitivity that's embedded within our recruitment assessment process. But we're seeing candidates that are really standing out, reconnecting with their alma maters, working with professors to support them in research projects. So thinking outside of the box, where they're able to still build upon their experience, as opposed to taking a different path for a summer internship, the lack of a summer internship.
To piggyback off of that, I think as you review resumes and we're reviewing candidates in the coming years or even months, we recognize the challenge that's been thrown their way. I always encourage, and I have a background in higher ed, so where there is an opportunity to write a cover letter to help tell that story, it's really the candidate's opportunity to be more transparent and upfront just about maybe how they've spent that time. So of course, if they're in a situation where this has allowed them more time and they can proactively be, understanding what the different jobs they're interested in look like, and if that means taking an additional online course or doing some sort of volunteer work, to demonstrate a new skill they learned. Of course, that's always good, and the best way to showcase those interests might be through a cover letter. So I think it kind of comes back to, in the actual application process itself, not just highlighting that major, but really understanding the role and understanding maybe where are there gaps in their resume as they're thinking about those roles that they're applying for. And even if it's just taking this time now to learn, that maybe that doesn't cost anything. If it's information they can just Google or on YouTube, things of that nature. Again, I think we're all kind of sensitive to that being the nature of the situation that we're in.
I agree with both Kristen and Lindsay. And I would also like to point out that there's just some simple things that I think we can all do to stand out. And I think that sometimes it's hard to apply for positions. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of thought that has to go into a resume, as well as cover letters, as Lindsay pointed out. But make sure you have people review your resumes and your cover letters for inconsistencies and for errors on the resumes and cover letters. Maybe there's things that your friends or colleagues can think of that you excel in that you might want to add to your resume. I think we're really hard on ourselves and we don't think about all the great qualities that we do have. And if somebody just takes a peek at it to, offer some additional suggestions about your skill sets. And then I also think it's really important to have career services, someone such as career services help you out, review those, make sure they're formatted properly, and make sure that they're not too long. Your resume doesn't need to be pages long. It's supposed to be a nice summary of yourself so that you can expand upon it in the interview process. Those are some tips that I'd like to provide. And I think that I would say that many recruiters would say the same thing. We don't need to know everything about you. We want to learn about you in that interview. We actually talk to you. One of the other things that I think is really nice is to get a follow-up from a candidate. And I don't mean to, say that you should follow up weekly, but maybe if you haven't heard anything for a couple of weeks, follow up, check in, see how things are going with the application process. The other thing is send a thank you email once you've had an interview. That actually speaks highly of you, I believe. It just shows that you care, and that to me, really stands out for an applicant. Thank you.
And if it's okay, I can just add, there's one secret sauce that I actually use for my own resume, but also for interns when we're doing resume prep for them. And I stumbled upon this about 6 or 7 years ago, but anyone who's listening and is interested in taking a refresh look at their resume, there is a website through Harvard Law School, and it's the Harvard Law School action verbs, and it's how to build your resume leveraging those action verbs. I'm happy to send the link out, but if you just Google Harvard Law School action verbs, it should populate that specific resume landing page, and you'll see it. It's definitely something I've leveraged in the past for our interns as well as myself.
What an awesome resource. And there's so much out there that's free. And that's one thing I really want to get across to you all. And this question was asked in the chat. You have free services as an alum to the Career Center. So you definitely don't have to ever pay to get the type of support and help you need on your resume, cover letter, practice interviewing, really anything across the career gamut. So awesome resources and awesome info. So to build on actually something Christine said in her intro, more virtual interviews are becoming a big part of the interviewing process. Can you guys share maybe the do's and don'ts for a candidate during a virtual interview, whether it's with an actual person or it's a pre-recorded, interview, as Christine mentioned?
Sure. I think there's, the do's are make sure that you are prepared, you practice. You can record yourself on your own devices just to see what you look like, the lighting is right, that you're looking into the camera. Make sure that you're dressed in professional business attire when you're going to in a video interview. It is a real interview, even though you might not be in person, it's still going to be an interview. Try and be positive in your interview. Try to, try not to answer your cell phone. Make sure you turn that off. Something very simple I think it's hard for many of us to put those devices down, but definitely in this situation, always put those devices down. Make sure you're in a quiet space. Make sure that you don't have a lot of distractions, whether that be, construction outside. Try and find a place away from that going on. Maybe your pets and kids. Maybe you can make sure that somebody's taking care of them or managing the kiddos at that time for an hour or so while you're doing those video interviews. Those are hopeful tips, I think. So.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I would just add I think you covered a lot of great ones, Christine. I would just add, do your research in advance, because likely one of the initial questions you'll receive is, what do you know about our company, or why are you interested in applying to this role? So make sure you have an answer prepared. You might get asked just the general, tell me about yourself, and, try and really consolidate who you are and what you bring to the table, and why you're interested in the role if you do get asked that question. And also be prepared with your own questions. So oftentimes, if I'm interviewing a candidate, if they don't have any questions prepared for me or about the role, I can't really gauge their interest or if they fully understand the role, perhaps. So I would really add those to the do's, and I think Christine covered a lot of the don'ts.
Yep, and I would just add 2 more things. What I'm finding as where I'm scheduling interviews for managers is not every manager is actually turning their video on. So don't, I would say don't be set back or alarmed by that. We're trying to encourage that if a candidate has an interview on, obviously, or a video on, we would want our managers to as well. But there's a level of comfort there, and that's definitely a best practice that we need to make sure that we're brushing up on as a firm when we continue through these virtual interviews. But I agree about the formal attire, and and just making sure that you're prepared. And arguably, I would say if you have the login, which you typically should, making sure that you log in about 10 to 15 minutes early, just as Danny had suggested to us, making sure that there are no technical issues. I've gone to present and facilitate a discussion, and I've been kicked out 2 minutes before. So it's stressful, and that's not the stress that you need to bear when you're going into an interview. So just making sure you're ahead of it.
Thanks for sharing those great tips. And to kind of add on to that, I know not all of you are using interview software where a candidate actually doesn't interact with anyone, so that pre-recorded. What are you looking for if you're using one of those types of softwares? What are you looking for in that pre-recorded interview? And what is the technology helping you do and kind of look for? And even if your company is not using that yet, is that something you're exploring, or are there things you're kind of looking at?
So at Progressive, our high volume team actually does use a pre-recorded software for those interviews. And I think a lot of the same tips and tricks apply for video interviewing. Still dress professionally, still be conscious of your background and background noises, and still be prepared. If you have access to the questions in advance, there's really no excuse for not having kind of practiced and prepared a response. Oftentimes they're timed, and so you want to be concise while still answering the question. So, that's what we look for, and you're trying to make an impression just as if you were meeting someone in person. So make sure you're emphasizing strengths and interests, similarly to what you would do, perhaps at a career fair or in an initial phone call.
Thanks for sharing, Lindsay.
I agree with Lindsay. As she mentioned, many things are going to be the same do's and don'ts with a regular video interview or an interview in general. You have a short amount of time to try and provide your answers. And usually the software allows you a few tests or attempts, I should say, at each response. So you do get a little bit of time, and know that it is somewhat uncomfortable to record yourself. We realize that as recruiters, that it's a little bit nerve-wracking, and it's not normal for most people to be recording themselves. So just know that we understand that. I think a quick, brief answer, really, good answer is better than a very long, I'm trying to grasp for, but incoherent. I'm making myself here, but a long, incoherent answer. Make it brief, make it just quick, and that'll be better than an incoherent answer. It's as I said, it's really uncomfortable, and we all recognize that. It's hard not to fidget. Just do your best, and we do understand.
Yeah. And I'm seeing the chat coming through on the thread about pre-recorded interviews and having a do-over. So we don't leverage a software for pre-recorded interviews ourselves, even in the high volume space. And so obviously every firm is different, and that's not good or bad. We just haven't gotten to that yet. But some of my peers that work at organizations that do, actually probably Lindsay should answer this more than I, but there are candidates that we meet that strike us that we absolutely would consider for other opportunities outside of maybe the one they initially interviewed for. So I wouldn't let a bad, or what you feel as though is a bad interview or video introduction deter you from continuing to pursue that organization. Just doing it thoughtfully and potentially networking with a recruiter via LinkedIn. That's, I would say, think creatively about how to connect with the organization. And then there was another question up here, but I'll loop back to that. A short video attached to your resume. So that's really interesting. I have not interfaced with that, but I wouldn't be opposed to it. But it's not something that we, from a business or an application perspective, would require.
Thanks. So our last question that we'll throw out there before working through some of the questions from the alumni that are on if you've hired anyone during this pandemic, what are candidates doing that have been successful, during the application and interview process, or are they the same things that made people successful before the pandemic? So kind of talking about kind of what are people doing to be successful in getting jobs at your organization?
For us, it's leveraging their network or creating a network. I've had more individuals that have applied to a position, reached out to the Career Services Center at their university, asking them to make a connection with myself or a teammate, in addition to looking at LinkedIn to see which of their network or maybe other alumni of UCCS who are employees of the organization they could speak to. So it's really getting creative about expanding that network, making that introduction, but the common thread that you have is UCCS. So I'm really excited to see that. And obviously we're continuing to hire, and we hope to see that for the foreseeable future, but at the very least, you're making an impression and building your network. And that's refreshing to me to see students doing that.
Thanks for sharing, Kristen.
Yeah, and I agree. I know I mentioned earlier just taking this time to like self-learn and self-educate. But the piece about understanding the types of roles you're applying for, I'll just share a story about, I currently have recs open for positions, and some candidates I'll see that they've applied for, like they currently have 6 other active applications in our system for other roles at Progressive. And who knows, they could be qualified for all those roles, but what that says to me is they don't really know if they want to be a systems engineer versus in quality assurance. And I can probably glean from their resume what they're more qualified for or what it appears they have interest in. But by leveraging your network and understanding a role better and asking questions before you submit that application, you're really being intentional about your decision to apply perhaps with that company or for that particular role. And, on that note, certain industries have just been hit harder. So I'm sure people are kind of looking differently perhaps at their line of work or where they may wish to work. And just the more people you talk to and the better you understand from a recruiter perspective sort of what opportunities are available, the smarter you'll be in the application process. So don't just, you can have your days where you're sitting back and relaxing and you got to let the world, hit you how it's hit you that day, but then, try and get back up on your feet the next and don't get too relaxed.
Thanks for sharing.
Just a quick comment I have to make regarding things that I've seen that are just more successful. I think candidates are being more responsive, and I know in the past I've seen a lot of people ghosting or not making sure that they're following up when they do apply to positions and things like that, or responding to recruiters in a timely fashion. And I have seen that during this pandemic, people are being much more responsive, and that's excellent because that speaks to how the candidate might be in the workplace, how they may be just good at follow through in the workplace. And so that speaks a lot to me. And I don't know, Lindsay and Kristen, if you've had any issues with ghosting previous to the pandemic and a change in that. I would love to hear your responses to that.
Oh yes, I'm in campus recruiting, so I definitely am cognizant for a lot of the undergrads when we're looking at our internship program, emails, phone calls, and it's normally texts that we'll have to reach out. So it's a lot of work when a candidate isn't responsive. So I agree. I also appreciate those who, when we're reaching out as a follow-up to an application, they're familiar with, to your point, the position they've applied to, and we would just give a suggestion to many of those individuals who are applying to multiple roles with multiple organizations. That's great. That's what you're supposed to be doing. You're getting your name out there. You're building your network. You're looking at different opportunities. But just keep a short list next to your computer on which positions you've applied to and the title or something that reminds you. because we're humans too, and it's nice to feel that someone has an interest in us or our organization and me or my organization. And it makes me a little bit sad when I call and someone forgets that they've applied. So I completely agree, Christine.
All right, so we're gonna go Q&A now, and I'm gonna work back through the chat, and I'm gonna ask some questions and make sure that that those get answered. So thanks for submitting, and please continue submitting questions if you have them. So Harry asked, this is kind of about working from home. So did you have employees working from home prior to the pandemic? Some of you talked a little bit about that. And has this shown your businesses that the ability to work from home is possible? So has there been talk about moving a lot more of the operations to a virtual aspect, eliminating the amount of employees in the office? So if you guys can kind of talk about the general sense of remote, is it here to stay? Are those things going to be considered in your businesses?
Well, public accounting by nature, we're not necessarily working from home, but a lot of our employees work out at clients. So they were able to adapt many of our employees quickly to a work from home environment. I think it has taught many of our employees and leadership that it is feasible for us to work from home. I still think that there's many challenges. There are jobs and roles that you cannot do from home. You just, by the nature of their job, they have to be in an office setting or in an office environment to complete those tasks. Or there are certain things, just parts of their jobs maybe that have to be done in the office or out at a client. I do think, though, this is a good case that we are going to see a lot of the businesses move to more work from home, remote work. Maybe not every single day, but perhaps, a little bit more open dialogue surrounding that work from home. I think some companies have already done it quite well and have been doing it for many years, but I think there's a lot of companies that think that you will get much more work done if your employees are able to engage with each other just by walking down the hall and having a quick communication instead of having to jump on a Skype call or video call or make a phone call. So we'll see, I think, a nice hybrid of that as we go forward.
Yeah, and there's a science behind, we have a whole team of people that are working on our return to office plan, the staggered starts, the staggered in-office schedules, and a lot of it, as many of you have probably heard, it's really contingent upon what happens in the fall, and we're all kind of in the same boat, waiting with bated breath to find out, is it getting better, is it not? And obviously work has to be done. So there's a lot of discussion about remote work and obviously more flexibility than there had been in the past, which is really, really great to see and hear. But very transparently, we're also hearing from individuals who would prefer to be back in the office. And it's a small group that either are unable to work from home because of constraints or every family's home, or they're taking care of others while they're at home. So we're hearing from both sides of either wanting to go in the office or wanting to remain working virtually. So the firm is being very sensitive to that. And at this point, our staggered return to the office is voluntary.
I was just going to add for Progressive, like I shared earlier, we went from the 8,000 over 40,000. So I think overall as a company, we've been incredibly impressed by what our IT department has been able to accomplish in terms of preparing everyone to make that transition and transitioning to a virtual internship. So I do think it has been eye-opening for, not just, certain managers who maybe never thought it was possible and have seen benefits and seen just as high a work performance perhaps, but similarly to, Kristen just sharing, it's ever changing. We're going to have a staggered approach back to the office. Last I heard was September at the earliest, but again, things have things are ever changing. So I think real estate and just figuring out, what we value so much about our workspace is the culture it provides, and being able to, walk up and down the stairwell to that cafe and have a conversation, and is that going to look the same? And so, our leadership is having those conversations, and we're really just not sure.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Kristen.
Sorry. No, that's it. I saw another question that had come through on the chat about ATS. So just pivoting a bit to how you're presenting, how candidates are presenting themselves and the creativity in the resume. So we've gone through a variety of different applicant tracking systems, and obviously ATS for those who are in HR and familiar with the acronym. We're currently leveraging Workday. Previously, we leveraged a system or platform called Taleo. But either way, what we find is the best system that we've been able to leverage is one that parses most of the content of the resume. So you have the ability to upload your resume, and I actually don't typically look at the populated fields that come through the parsing. When I look at an application, I'm actually pulling up the attachment of the resume. So I'm more comfortable seeing what has been created by the candidate as opposed to what a platform or a system is pulling from an actual resume. So I'm not sure if I guess every recruiter has a different process, but that's my process. So I appreciate the creativity, particularly if it's something more in line with, a marketing lens or has a role that has more of a creative spin to it.
Thanks for sharing, Kristen. Anything to add, Christine or Lindsay, on that question? So the question was, how much creativity should a candidate sacrifice in resume design because of ATS software?
I think, Christine, to your point earlier, I think I'm trying to remember what you said exactly, but I was just going to say, for me, I recruit for IT, so I'm not really looking for creative. I want to know that you read the job description, and, I can easily find your skill set and, perhaps your minimum qualifications. So that would be the first thing I'm looking for. I always open each resume as an attachment as it's sent. So I think similar to what Kristen was saying. But to Christine's point about sharing it with those in your network and making sure you get feedback on it, part of your network can be a recruiter, someone you've, perhaps have spoken to in a role that is responsible for reviewing resumes, as well as, your career services staff to get their input.
Thank you. So transition. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Being creative is great. I think what is more applicable is if you actually gear your resume to the position and the industry that you're applying to, because what a marketing job might be looking for versus an accounting job or insurance might be very different. So you have to make sure that you're gearing it to the right industry.
That's a really good transition to which is an experienced professional. So Beth asked, an experienced professional, how do you show that your experience in one field applies to another? So really that transition piece.
I'm sorry, Danny, say that. Could you repeat the question? The transferable skills?
Yep. So someone who maybe has 10 years of experience in the marketing field is now trying to apply for a job in an industry, a different job function. How can they really sell their skills between their 10 years of experience to a new industry, new job function?
Yeah, so I'll jump in on that one. We are a firm believer that particularly those coming out of undergraduate or a graduate program or alumni organizations, if they're deciding to switch industries, their skill set is still embedded within their strengths. So if you look across our industry, we're financial services, but to Lindsay's point, they're an IT or a technology company that is in the insurance industry. So I'm looking for technologists that are interested in applying their skill sets within the financial services industry. Similarly for accountants who are interested in applying it towards reconciliation of our mutual funds. So what I always, the suggestion that I give is you know your core strengths and your interests, and is there a particular industry where you were interested in leveraging those to learn more about the industry? So I'm not necessarily looking often in a campus perspective for someone who has deep knowledge within derivatives. That's really hard. I don't have that either, but it's something that you can pick up through a lot of our on-the-job learning. So just as long as you understand a 10K and a 10Q from an accounting perspective, that's where we can teach you the application within our industry.
Good feedback. Anything else on that one? Well,
I was just going to say, I mean, I think most skills are transferable. You know, you think about it as like if you're in customer service, that's going to be transferable to many skill sets, many other job positions. One thing is in the accounting industry, it's more of a specialized field. So we're looking for people that are eventually going to be CPA licensed. So there is a prerequisite in that for your higher education. So it is a little bit different in certain industries. So you just have to be cognizant of that. But of course, most of your skill sets are transferable in one form or fashion. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So going back to a question answer that was given by Kristen, but I think anyone could answer this. So Karen asked, so if your preference is to view the actual resume, what's the purpose of the ATS? So of course, other than creating the database of candidates, she was always under the impression that the ATS was screening for qualifications. So maybe just talk about kind of, you know, what, and probably every company and every recruiter does it differently, but the points of ATS systems.
Yeah, so for us, the ATS, the applicant tracking system, is a repository for candidates. And we are a recruiting team, a talent acquisition team of 26 individuals. So there are often times that someone will apply to a position that I have, but I know based on my weekly touch points with other recruiters within my team that they have something that would be more applicable. So it's easy for me to share a link or share a resume within the ATS with that individual that the recruiter would be able to pick up their candidacy. So applying to through an applicant tracking system will help ensure that your resume can be disseminated to others within a recruiting team. In addition to that, within the applicant tracking, and I'm sure that as you've seen it, within our application process, there are a number of disclosures. We are in a heavily regulated industry, as both of the other panelists are. So ensuring that as we're going through the process that we are able to clear a variety of different disclosures that may pop up that are specific to our industry that we wouldn't be able to move forward in the hiring process with you.
Yeah, and it's the same case for us, you know, no matter what job you're applying for within Progressive, you are going to need to go through that applicant tracking system for those disclosures. I work on our more specialty team as opposed to our high volume. So I need to review some of those resumes to really understand, you know, the minimum qualifications look different. So for IT roles and analyst roles and corporate roles, I'm more inclined to, I can really only speak to my process as far as why I open up the resumes as opposed to like a high volume recruiter where they're seeing, you know, 8 to 10 times the amount of applicants, and it's simply not feasible. You know, you need to rely on what an applicant has presented in their resumes, and maybe how much overlap there is with the job description and so on. So, but yeah, for the reasons that Kristen mentioned, you know, to get you into our process, creating a profile within our system so we can understand you as a candidate is really always going to be the first step, at least at Progressive.
And I would agree with both Kristen and Lindsay. It comes back to compliance issues a lot of times.
Yeah, and I think what I tell students or alumni or anyone who's job searching is if you tailor your documents to the position, to the company, your resume will float to the top in whatever process or system that they use. So if you apply really well, you'll get noticed. So try not to worry so much about how one company may attack it versus another. If you apply well and you've done your due diligence with networking and all of the things that they've talked about today, you'll get noticed. It's just about being persistent and resilient. So perfect timing. So I wanted to hold us to about 45 minutes. I know people are busy and have other things going on. So if you do have more questions for the panel, you can feel free to email me or the careers account, which I'm going to give you that email here soon. I'd be more than happy to sort of gather some answers and get those out to you, because I know there might be more specific things that you want to ask. So thank you to the panelists for joining. I know this was a big commitment, and finding time in your day to do this means a lot for me and for UCCS. So a few final key takeaways just to make sure you know what resources you have. So Handshake is an amazing resource that all UCCS students and alumni have access to for free, no matter when you graduated or where you're at. So please take advantage of that. It's where a lot of organizations and a lot of these recruiters post their positions specifically to UCCS. LinkedIn LinkedIn still has a really good page on who's hiring, who's not across the country. So if you're looking for some more specific information, and please don't hesitate to schedule an appointment with us by emailing the careers@uccs.edu email, and we'd be happy to set up a one-on-one, critique that resume, just virtual interview, whatever that looks like for you. Please let us know how we can support you. Please do remember there are 3 more sessions of our alumni webinar series this summer. So we'll remote work, which was talked a little bit about today. We'll talk a little bit about that, if it's here for good, how to look for those roles, if that's something you're interested in. Then we'll talk about the evolving workplace in the future. So what's specifically going on in the market and what companies are looking for, and where hiring may see an uptick and where hiring may see a downtick in the future. And then we're going to do some design your work life stuff, where if you're really trying to figure out, well, you know, the job I'm in isn't just not a good fit for me. How can we find other paths that might be a good fit for you, whether it's at that company or somewhere else? So that's what the rest of the series looks like. Please register for those if you're interested. So we'll kind of end it there. If you do have any questions, don't hesitate to put it in the chat or to email the careers email. We'd be happy just to get some of those answers. So thank you, Christine, Kristen, and Lindsay for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Danny. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Nice to meet you guys. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.